have had some, I mean, we're not beginners, right? We know this, this world, IP, tech transfer, we've done it. So the idea that I bring here today is to give you the, as John said, you know, not to say this is the way to do it, but this is what I've learned, some basic principles and some of the I think I got enlightened a little bit over the years of doing many, many licenses, and to share that with you and to use that as a basis for a discussion. And please comment, you know, question, comment about anything I say. I'll say at the outset, and we had this earlier debate, a little debate about IP ownership, you know, whether or not a public sector research institution like a university, whether or not we would sell our patents. And we have a firm policy, we never sell our patents, never. And that's the case in most universities in the US, not all, but there are some that vary from that. And I don't want to open that debate up again, but just to say that we took that firm position, and frankly, we would have disagreements with companies who'd come in and go, oh no, we need to own it if we're going to invest money in it. We go, well, first of all, our policy is that we only license, but tell me why you need it. And I could never hear a good reason, frankly. Because every time they would say, well, I need this, I need that, I go, I can get that to you through a well-crafted license agreement. So at the end of the day, I only lost one license deal in hundreds over 20 years where a company walks away to say, well, if you won't let me own it, I'm walking. I go, no, look, what do you need? I'm going to give you what you need commercially. And yes, we have to retain some fundamental rights because it's who we are. I'm not asking you to do anything different than what you would do. You would retain the ownership of your patents. Anyway, all this is to say we had one vehicle, one channel for tech transfer, and that's licensing. License out, whether it's to a small company, a medium-sized company, a multinational, or startup. Now there are going to be differences in the negotiation, and if with a startup we might have, we might take ownership, equity, some ownership in the startup. I'm sure some of you do that. But at the end of the day, it's all a license. We retain ownership and we license. Now, the other thing I want to mention is that much of what I'm going to say today is premised on exclusive licenses, okay? I will take the opportunity to talk about non-exclusives, and we did non-exclusive licenses when our technology was ready. If we had a technology, for example, we would have plant varieties. A plant variety, all we got to do is hand it out to the growers. They can grow it, sell it. No more development. But any technology that we ever had that required more investment, certainly startups, but any of our technologies that needed to have some additional investment, exclusivity was essential. Without exclusivity, I can't imagine anybody investing. So for us, exclusives are a way of life. Now, ever since I first came to India and I would say exclusives, and I'd get a little like, well, no, we prefer non-exclusives. And I've had a lot of discussions with my Indian colleagues, and I know there's a concern that, well, you're locking it up with one company. And maybe that's inappropriate because the funding came from the national, from the people, essentially. And we would get that argument too. Companies would say, well, how can you give them a license when we've all paid for it as taxpayers? But one of the things people need to understand is that when we do exclusive licenses, it's got conditions, it's got diligence requirements. The standards that we require our licensees to live up to in terms of providing, diligently pursuing, investing, selling, et cetera, very high. And if they don't meet it, we'll take the technology back. And so, anyway, I know, let me ask you this. How many of you here have experience negotiating licenses? Most of us here. And how many of you here negotiate non-exclusive licenses? And how about exclusive licenses? Okay, so the way we always looked at it, non-exclusive, exclusive, depends upon the technology. And so my position always has been, when I was talking to my Indian colleagues, if you can avoid having these policy prohibitions for exclusive, non-exclusive, then that's better, because it gives you the flexibility that you, as the negotiator, the tech manager, can then design. And you're going to hear me talk a lot about designing today. So let's get started. And this is, the distillation of hundreds of licenses over the years. And some of the things that I will talk about, they only came to my mind in a conscious way, really, probably in the later third of my career. So, sometimes it takes you a long time to learn things, trial and error. John?
Let me add another perspective from the United States. America has a significant number of national laboratories. And the government felt very uncomfortable with exclusive licenses from national technology. So a process was worked out. An applicant company that wanted an exclusive license had to submit a mini business plan and a rationale for the exclusivity. The government agency looked at it and thought, this sounds reasonable. If they wanted to proceed, they then published in the National Register the fact that they were considering an exclusive license. So it became publicly known, if people paid attention to the publication, that this would be an exclusive license. And people were not quite invited, but it was expected that if you were a competitor and wanted the same deal, you would realize what's going on and make application. And at the end of the day, the agency would look at the two, perhaps, or just the exclusive, and decide, yes, made public, no response, great, exclusive license. When Congress asked what's going on, it was a case of, it was very transparent, and finally Congress allowed and said, okay, that's a good process. In the case of competitors, the agency would look at what they were going to do with the technology, and it turned out more often than not, they were competitors, but only significantly they dealt with very different markets. So the license became exclusive to the one in the market they wanted, whereas the other was in a slightly different market. And in the the overlap, the agency either decided to award it to that company or basically said it's going to be non-exclusive for that particular market. So in the national laboratories, there's a very transparent process where the public is made known what is going on, and there is an allowance time for a response. As opposed to a university, which doesn't have that. If we want to award an exclusive, bang, it gets done. And if a competitor comes in and says, why did you give them an exclusive license? The answer is, because they asked for it. Well, why didn't you let the world know? Well, we don't do it that way, fundamentally. Okay? So I just wanted to add that different flavor to what Dick and I will be talking about.
I got this. Yeah. So let me say then at the outset that the way our process would work is we understand our technology. You know, we've done our inventiveness analysis, and we understand our what I call the property control position, the quality of our IP, and maybe we have biological property. So we understand that pretty well, and we've done some homework. We know the applications, and we understand at a preliminary level the market applications, and you know, and we've gone out to find partners through our tech marketing campaign, and we get some company to express interest, and we go back and forth exchanging information, probably under a confidentiality agreement, maybe initially just open conversation, but they say, you know, we're interested. Can we talk about a deal? Sure. I mean, that's why I'm here. Okay. So and of course, always enjoyed the face-to-face. You know, it's harder to do these deals when you're doing them remotely, at least have some time face-to-face. So we would invite the interested party, the person that I probably was going to negotiate with, and probably a technical person, invite them to our campus, arrange for them to meet with the inventor, and I would have a preliminary idea of what my strategy was. Again, preliminary idea. Is this going to be an exclusive? That's kind of what I'm thinking. It would be an exclusive license. And I would conduct, and I think we're going to be talking about, are we talking about valuation in this advanced course? Yes. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about some valuation. We do what I call a pre-negotiation valuation, which is enough valuation to have a reasonably good feel for sort of an opening position. Okay. So then, we've had some time, they've gone over to the lab, and now I'm sitting down with the person who I'm going to negotiate with, and at its core, it's usually a one-on-one. Now, there's usually a team, often a team behind, but in my experience, the best deals are done when that's, you know, there's two primary deal makers, negotiators. First of all, I've heard this, Premnath was talking about it, John has said it, and that is building some rapport. You know, let's have some conversation here to kind of warm up and become human. Where are you from? And, you got kids, and, you know, a little bit of personal, just enough so that this is not just strictly hardcore transaction. We'll get to that eventually, but, you know, a little personal interaction. And then, my key modus operandi is to, believe it or not, talk less and listen more. So I come, having done some homework about their industry, I certainly know my technology and the IP situation as well as anyone. What I don't really know in depth is their industry or their company. So that's where I start. I go, we're so happy you're here, and you know what, we're looking for the right kind of strategic partner that we can work with. So, you know, tell me about your industry. And then I just sit back and I listen. And they tell, and I ask for, you know, more clarification, and I go, oh, you know, well, I was noticing this fact, and how does that fit? And, you know, I get clarification, make sure I'm correct, and we get on the same page, same frequency. And then eventually I get around to like, well, tell me about your company. You know, look, we want to be a good partner for you. Maybe you've heard, I don't know if we've said it here, we said it upstairs, the other group, and that is that licenses are like marriages. They're long-term, relatively long-term. Now that is a difference. I've noticed every time I get to know my Indian colleagues, they're like, oh yeah, we'll do an exclusive for 5 years. And do you guys do that? Limited period, yeah. And that's, I don't know about you, John, but we would always, our view was, as long as they're a licensee in good standing, why would I terminate? Or why would I add others? Because in the US, they'd be like, what? Well, no, we want to invest in the long term. Just as it starts getting exciting and profitable, you take it from, no. So normally our licenses would last for the life of the patent. It's standard practice. But I know you do it differently, and I'm like, well, if you can, if that works for you, fine. But I will ask the company about their business. I want to be a good partner for you. Cornell wants to maintain its reputation as a good licensor partner. And the more I know about your business, your products, your manufacturing, the more I know, the better partner I'm going to be for you. And not to worry, anything you say to me is going to be kept confidential. I'm going to use it only for the purposes of helping you and I design a license agreement. And I say, I'm going to ask you for information that will allow me to be as good as I can be to work with you to design something that makes this as profitable for you as possible and allows me to share a reasonable amount. So I just start listening. I'm taking, mental notes, and, down the road in the negotiation, I'll be using a lot of that information because I'm sincere. I want to make sure this is really a nice tailored agreement. One of the things I will do too, and I learned this over years, do you guys all have a license agreement template? Template, yeah. If you don't have one, you ought to get one. Find an agreement that feels comfortable. You can find them online or talk to colleagues, get one, and make sure do you have to report to, does in-house legal have a say in your?
So we don't have their say, but whatever we draft, the IP team or the tech transfer team draft, we share for their comments or whatever process we have written, are they in agreement?
So legal gets a chance to comment.
They may comment.
Yeah, that's the way we did it. We strove to be good partners with in-house legal. And one of the things we would always say is, and we would say this over lunch, like, okay, let's just get this straight. This is your domain. Some of that legal boilerplate, and indemnification issues and some of the legal force majeure, well, I won't touch that. And if I touch it, I'm going to ask for your blessing. On the other hand, anything that has to do with financial terms, the technology itself, milestones, all that, that's our domain. And they were very comfortable with that. Our in-house legal was like, fine, because they knew we were doing a good job. So anyway, I will hand out the template to this negotiating partner to say, okay, so here's our standard template. Now, and I learned this after a bunch of, wasted time, frankly. I'd say, okay, let's just walk through this, just very quickly. Okay, section 1, which has to do with defining the IP. Okay, that's what we're going to define the IP, and that's between you. We'll agree on that. Scope of the license. Scope. Make, use, sell. Territory. What are we giving What are we granting to you? And that's all completely negotiable. And then, oh, this license fee, what does that mean? Well, this is what it means for us. It's a non-refundable upfront usually, but it can be spread out. It's totally negotiable. Royalty rate, what does that mean? Well, and we go through, we just walk through enough. And I'll go to certain clauses, I'll go, this clause here that says we warrant one thing and only one thing. This is the way we do it. I think probably Florida State, same way. We own it. Oh, there comes that word again. We own it. Nothing more. Because they'll say, well, do you promise that we won't infringe someone? No. Sorry. No opinion. Well, what if it doesn't work? We're not guaranteeing that it works. If it doesn't work, you can terminate the license agreement. So one thing only, and we're not going to give you any more, and don't ask because it's a non-starter.
And as is basis.
What's that?
As is.
As is, yeah.
As is.
Yeah. Now, I will tell you one little trick, and that is, or just a thing we ended up where the other side was like, well, what if your inventor has misrepresented some of the data? And I said, yeah, that would be a problem. Or what if you lied about some of this? I go, yeah, I think you've got a legitimate case. So we actually did, and I went to legal and I said, okay, here's what I'm willing to give them. If they could prove that we had engaged in any behavior that was negligent or malfeasance, then we had some liability. But only if they could prove that we had been, bad actors. But otherwise, no, we accept no. And that's the other thing too. We always shove all the business risk off to our licensee, all of it. Now, and I don't know any U.S. university that's ever been sued because of the practice. Maybe you do, John. I don't know of any university that's been sued for the practice, the commercialization of a university's IP by a company. The companies can get sued, but they indemnify us. Okay. But yeah, John.
There have been cases where the university has sued the faculty member
Yeah.
because of a variety of reasons. Okay? So, go ahead. Continue, and I got a comment.
Okay.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Usually the organization is the owner,
Yes.
right? So how are they suing the faculty members?
I'm sorry, what was the
The
She-
question?
IP owner is the organization, right?
Yep.
And the inventor has transferred all the rights to the organization.
Right?
So if faculty has any malintention or they have fabricated any data, whatever, right? So it is more of a disciplinary action which is to be taken by the organization. So suing is something which I
So-
find uncomfortable.
So your statement, John, was that the faculty member was being sued by who? By the institution?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because of some malfeasance, some.
They did a side deal with the startup that was not made known to their employer.
Yeah.
Okay, they real tricky stuff. And with respect to this clause, anytime I use it, upon request only, didn't volunteer it. The level of proof had to be suitable to proceed to a court of law. So there's a certain standard. Not, I accuse you. No, forget it. I accuse you, and here is the written documentation on which I base my accusation. Lawyers look at it and say, this is a case that should move forward. Fine. So there's quite a high standard before you do anything about it.
Maybe the word
If
willful negligence.
can I use
Yes, one
this?
is
Yeah,
negligence.
I think I will use that.
Happen at a student level also. But if there is a willful negligence, then I will.
Okay,
Otherwise, what?
this is, I guess, a better place to sit.
Richard, your statement was incomplete. You said that you went to legal checking that in case other parties were able to prove this misrepresentation or the technology doesn't work, then what was the further clause you had inserted?
Well, the further,
The consequence of that,
that they had the right to sue us. Or,
if they have the right to sue.
yes, for damages.
Not only cancelling the license.
No, exactly, yeah, no, and we did that very rarely, but we did it because we thought, well, that is reasonable, if it could be proven. Anyway,
Can educational institutions in India give that?
If they have an inbuilt clause like that,
Institutions give that kind of a clause where they are
indemnification.
Indemnification clauses are there.
License agreement.
Okay.
It's liability. Liability.
No.
So, liability is nothing
So
like.
CSI
well, I don't want to get us sidetracked on this. You guys may want to have a separate conversation about it, and I don't want to focus on, the deal breakers and the showstoppers right now. I'd like to kind of I want to give you a bigger picture. John?
Before you move forward, I want to tell you the following. In the United States, before the Bayh-Dole Act in 1980, there were a handful of universities that did licensing and commercialization. Okay? Just a small. The mechanism was such that the government owned, and they had to go and ask for the ownership back in order to proceed, which they did. Finally, they got fed up and went and put the Bayh-Dole Act that automatically gave certain rights down to the institution. Okay, the 6 or 7 knew what they were doing. The Bayh-Dole Act came in, and there were 200 other of us. And we didn't have a clue what to do. Okay? So we all got together as one group and said, what do we do? And the leaders that had done this said, okay, here's how you approach it. Finally, Harvard, MIT, Stanford, where the office was headed by women, said, all right, enough of this. We are going to make public our license documentation. Anyone who wants to use it, use it. So all of a sudden, the entire community stopped fussing over this, that. Here were the standards used by the big guys, right? That was in 1993. So as smooth as we make the American system, we've been at it a long time, all right? We're not any better than you are. We just got started earlier. We were fortunate in having, bluntly, these 3 leaders who said, let us help the community by putting the templates on the table. You can adapt it to Florida language, of course. You can adapt it to Maryland language, of course, and liabilities. But generally, here's how you approach it. So when companies came to us, after that, it was a case of, well, here's the template. It looks okay except for this, that, and the other thing. Wait a minute, that's how Stanford does it. Oh, okay. So the argument became stronger and stronger. So what Dick and I and Ashley are reflecting is decades of forward and back progress, okay? And ultimately, sharing information. That was the key. Once the companies understood this is how a typical American university approached it, it became somewhat similar. Okay? It became simpler. This is the way that everybody does it. Oh, okay. Well, I'll get back to you. They phoned their legal and said, I've been told this is how Stanford does it. Yeah, we got a deal with Stanford and it looks very, very, very similar. So all of a sudden, it became the standard across the country. Okay? Not because, okay, fine. Done.
Just to add here, even in NCL we have used certain Boston area agreements as templates and modified it for negotiations.
Absolutely.
So that
Yeah.
has been very helpful. Let me
Yeah.
comment here.
The more, the merrier. don't struggle with your own sort of language and everything else, because you're going to run into problems, and it's been proven. But the other thing that's done, in the state of Florida, the directors got together every 3 months. The big university, the University of Florida, would have a legal firm review the standard license agreement to update it with respect to lawsuits in the past year. Occasionally there was some shift. So we had a process where one of the universities in the state would get it reviewed and then share that information with everybody else. So our deals, documents remained current. Okay, again, sharing.
One of the reasons, one of several reasons why you want to use a template, your template, and in fact my rule is, and I never varied from this, the owner of the technology produces the first draft of the license agreement, okay? And I would have companies go, no, we're going to use ours. No, we're going to use, I'm happy to review yours and try to incorporate some notions and concepts, but no, we're going to use my license agreement. Why? In particular, because, practical reason, because we know it. I know it in my sleep. Because, you know, it's easy, if you don't know a license agreement, it's easy, you've got to double your effort to review and be careful. So just stick with your own template. Also, I was going to just, you asked the question about arbitration. I've had this issue before where the battle of the arbitration jurisdictions. It's like, oh no, because for us it was, oh, it has to be New York. You know, and you're like, no, it has to be India, right? And I'm like, we're supposed to be doing tech transfer, not arguing over arbitration jurisdictions. And so what we finally decided is like, take it out. Be silent. Just don't put it in there. And it'll only become, if it's a problem, you can deal with it then. What are the chances you're going to have an arbitration issue? Low. And the other side goes, oh, take it out completely? Yes. Done. So that's how I've solved it several times.
Yeah, can I just add one more thing? I've had a company say, we're going to use our templates as the company. I said, okay, give it to me. Oh, by the way, I'll phone you back in 6 months. No, we want to do the deal now. I'm going to have my legals, when they get to it,
Yeah.
when I get to it, take a look.
There you go.
And we'll get back to you. No, we need to do it next week. Okay, well then we're going to use mine.
Use mine. There you go. That's better. Maybe that's better than no, because I said so. So,
Oh, absolutely. And once the company realized by looking at my template, it wasn't my template, it was the template that most people in the university community use. It was a case of, okay, thank you, and it got worked out.
Okay, so not to raise this divisive topic again, but these are, I just wanted to, some people ask me, well, why do you only license? And these are some of the reasons here. And here's one of the big ones. Practically, if you've ever done valuation, trying to arrive at a sale price is so much harder than negotiating what you're going to hear me. I'm going to rephrase a license agreement. And I'm going to recalibrate maybe for you the way you think about a license agreement instead of thinking about it as a negotiation. Now, it is, of course, but I'm going to give you a little different way to think about it. So the license is this ideal means for the tech creator and owner, us, and the implementer, the company, to fairly share returns and risks. That's what we're doing. Okay, we're going to talk more about that. So what's the goal? It's tech transfer, not tech stoppage. It's tech transfer. That's why we do this, right? So why do we need to structure it? Well, because we're dealing with risky technology. Now I know that's a problem. We heard this yesterday. Oh, Indian industry doesn't want early stage technology. Now that is an issue. Are you guys all finding that? Well, yeah, we want it to be TRL 6. Well, there are a lot of things I want in life. I don't want it to rain tomorrow here in Pune. But what if it does? I can't control that. I can't control the status of the development, I wish it was higher too. I wish it was 5 or 6, but it's not. So the key is to go out and find those partners who, in your ecosystem, who will be willing to take the risk. And have you had some success in finding companies that are willing to take risks?
It's very low.
Very, number is
But
very.
it's very low chances.
Or we have to find a scale-up part.
The scale-up part. Oh, you mean like an intermediate? Yeah.
Something like some startup or spin-off.
But the
which
startup,
gets
yeah.
To a certain level, PRL 7 or 8, and then industry.
Yeah. And the fact is, in the US, too, we have this problem. And it hit me a long time ago, and that is startups are often the only way. You're going to bridge that gap. So that's something we just have to live with. So that's why we all probably ought to gear up to do better startups.
In the United States, licensing began to spread after 1980, okay? But prior to that, it was the big guys that did it. And then for a long time, not a lot was going on until 1978, when gene splicing was invented in a university and turned and created a whole new industry, okay? All of a sudden, licensing became the thing to do. Otherwise, you weren't in the game, and your shareholders or your bosses were going to be very unhappy with you. So it took a mega hit in America to drive licensing into what we're talking about today. Then there was Google, okay? Google was licensed, and supposedly Stanford made, I don't know, a whole bunch of money, millions and millions and millions. And when you talk to Kathy Koo about what really went on, you learn that Stanford invested cash in Google. That's where they made their money. That cash bought equity that then became very valuable, whereas the equity in the license was that sort of thing. So pray for a big hit somewhere, okay? And that will begin to drive corporations to say, why aren't we doing more of that? You know, because that's the future. The last thing I'll say is, there have been comments, big companies aren't interested. Well, of course they're not interested. Why? It's easier to spend $50 million to acquire a company with an ongoing cash flow than it is to fool around with something that may not scale, that may not work. So they're not interested. Of course they're not interested. So you got to build up, but you've got to communicate to the outside world, to the corporate world, this is what we do, here's the standards, and here's the sorts of things that can happen. And then generate the interest in licensing.
So hundreds of licenses at Cornell, 500 plus licenses. I asked my staff to do categorization of the size of our licensees. You know what percentage of them were large companies? Any guess?
Very less.
5. The majority, if they weren't startups, the majority were small, medium. And same, so that's a fact of life. And so then the fact is you got to find partners that face the fact that it's risky. And that, for another day, a conversation of how do you find those. Part of it's tech marketing, cultivating, networking, et cetera. You can find them using various ways. So how do you manage this risk together? How do you capture value together? By designing an instrument. This is gradually what I began to realize. I'm not really negotiating, we're not negotiating against each other. I go, no, come over on this side. We're designing together. You know, when engineers get together to design an airplane, is there negotiation? I suppose. Yes. But more than anything, they're designing together. Going, oh, let's try this element. Oh, that doesn't fit, does it? No, it doesn't fit with this. Let's design an instrument. That's the license agreement. Let's design an instrument that reasonably, realistically, and fairly shares value capture, because that's what we're talking about. I want a license fee. I want A royalty for us, normally, the standard for us, I'll tell you what our standard is. Again, exclusive license, I want an upfront, non-refundable license fee. And, you know, it can be modified, and there's all kinds of ways you could modify it. No, okay, it's too much, we'll split it out into 3 years or that sort of thing. We'll talk more about other design tools. Royalty, typically a percentage of net sales. Is this the way you guys do it? These are all familiar terms, right? Yeah, okay. All of that is value capture. I'm capturing some as the licensor, and presumably they're going to capture some too by their sales and profitability. But also we're sharing risk. Why do we care? Because it's a risky, all of these are risky endeavors. I wish all the technologies that we license were as far advanced as some of the things I see around here, well developed. So many of our technologies are just so embryonic. Risk is high. So I have to accept that. And that's what I sit down with the other designer and we say, okay, how can we design this instrument to balance that value capture, taking in all these different elements, okay? You'll hear me talk about commercialization / implementation. Why? Because those of us who are in the public sector, we have, I believe, obligations to shepherd certain technologies and IP, not because commercialization is the real vehicle. I've had technologies where it's really philanthropic and humanitarian. Example, a foot-controlled prosthetic hand. This was invented in Sri Lanka. And one of my students actually was working on this, and she did a really good job of the value proposition. You know, like how much does it cost to make these, and how much are they going to sell them for? And I go, oh, wait a minute, time out. Let's think about this for a minute. Sri Lanka suffered a civil war, and how many people lost their hands? A lot. And I'm like, no, the value proposition isn't the real driver here. It's humanitarian, philanthropic. So that's why I throw in implementation, just so we're all aware that sometimes it's not always just about the pure profitability. So you're a licensed designer. So start thinking about it. Man, I'm a designer, and now you start thinking about, you bring in the art and the creativity of the deal making, okay? The license has these various mechanisms. I've already mentioned a couple. The license fee, the royalty, but there are others. So what it does, these mechanisms allow the designers to allocate reward or and risk, okay? And this ideal balance, and this is what I'm always striving for. You know, I'm always like, okay, and I think I will tell you a story about how I designed unbalanced agreements, unbalanced in our favor. Oh boy, that's a win, isn't it? Because what happens, it's not balanced and it is unstable, and gradually over time the other side goes, this is unstable. We want out. So did I win? Yeah, sort of in the short term, but I didn't do right by the technology because we lost a horse in midstream. The ideal balance equilibrates for the potential market value. That's where we spend a lot of time with that pre-market valuation. What's the quality of the IP or the property control position? What's the value proposition? Do you guys all do this? You know, what's the value proposition, right? Every one of my technologies that I assign to a tech manager, they got to come back to me, and not only do they have to tell me in a preliminary way what the potential IP or property control position, includes biological property, what that potential quality is, but also what's the value proposition. Construct one basic value proposition, okay? And then we look a little further into, you know, market sizes and penetrations, et cetera. So It's going to equilibrate this design instrument for the potential market value of the technology, the risk that it may not achieve that value. Remember, we started by me saying, okay, let's sit down and talk about your industry. And I just listened. And after they've answered my questions and clarification, I go, wow, what an interesting industry. You're my expert in this industry now. And I'm going to rely on you to tell me the full truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth about this industry. Now let's talk about your company. We talk about the company and about their manufacturing issues and all the things, so I get a real sense. But then I want to turn around and go, okay, now you know what we ought to do is we ought to agree on that TRL. So you've talked to the inventor. We had a meeting with them and your technical people. You know, do we have an understanding of what TRL our technology is at? And if they go, yeah, it's a 2, and I go, whoa, no, I think it's more like a 4. We have an issue. Do you guys do this? Do you talk to them and go, okay, let's agree on where we are. Why? Why do we have to agree on that? Because it's risk level, right? Let's agree on what the risk level is and what we need to do, and I say we, it's really what the licensee needs to do mostly, to lower that risk and raise that TRL. And just a little trick of the trade, the more you can be empathetic to your potential licensee in terms of the risk they will take and the cost they will incur to reduce that risk, you know, like, so what do you think you're going to have to do? What are we going to have to do to get it ready for first sale? How are we going to do that? How are you going to do it? What role do you want us to play? Oh, yeah, I better take that into consideration. So I have gotten more deals done where they almost don't care about what the license fee is, as long as I have embraced the risk that they're taking, and I take it seriously. So I recommend we all get on the same page. Again, this is part of the design, right? So, yeah, John.
I was asked to create a tech transfer office at Florida State University in '96. And went in and created it, and I had come from a background, as Dick describes. Careful analysis, understanding what you're doing. And in '96, the Taxol license had been renegotiated and closed. 6 months later, the technology had not scaled. And Bristol-Myers Squibb, for a variety of reasons, gave us an enormous amount of money up front. We're going to have to give it back. So at that point, I said, I have no idea how this is going to work. And I asked only one question. What are you going to do with my technology? Okay? And we did very little analysis. We just listened. And there were 3 instances where the company told us what they were going to do, and we looked at them, and we had no clue what they were talking about. We had no idea that our technology could be used in that manner. So we could have done all the analysis we wanted, miss the boat, the whole thing. The lesson of Taxol was, get the deal done, get it out. It may not work. Put it in the hands of someone that's interested in it, okay? So I understand this. Ashley may talk about the story at the University of Delaware. A company guy approached, there was a active touch glass that they had invented. And he came in and they were arguing back and forth, and finally the corporate guy got fed up and said, all right, I'll give you $1 million for it. They were astounded. And they took it. They didn't know what the guy was going to do with it because they hadn't asked. They were so, it was $1 million. So they took the $1 million. 2 years later, they understood how they had really screwed up. The corporate guy was Steve Jobs. The touch-sensitive glass in iPhones became absolutely enormous. And they hadn't asked the question, what are you going to do with my technology? So you can do an analysis, get comfortable, understand what it is, but really the question is, what are you going to do with my technology? And then listen very, very carefully and ask some questions. And that's the case of, okay, what do you think the product might look like? Well, we think it might be this and that. So why don't we sculpt the royalty to what you think it might be, but also have a clause in there that if things don't work out as we think it might, come on back and we'll renegotiate and restructure because you've got a new product for a new market that you hadn't anticipated at the time. So it's a case of understanding, get comfortable with what they're doing, get shocked and surprised, and then put the royalty around the type of product. And if they don't know what the product is, you don't get the license. You get an option to a license until you have a firmer understanding of what the product is, and come back and we'll lock it down. And in the option agreement, in the appendix, we have a page that says, if it's this product, the royalty will be something like this. If it's this product, it'll be something like that. So the company is comfortable that there's a fence around what might happen. So again, huge unknowns.
I mean, you can't predict the future, of course, but I like the idea of going through a certain level of preliminary. Like I say, what are you going to need to do? Like John says, what's the product? Where are you headed with this? Let's talk about that development. And sometimes it's really critical, and sometimes it's so critical I want them as a requirement in the license agreement to provide me with a roadmap of where they're going to go, right? And that might be part of the milestone development, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And the value of the IP. I always go back to, what's the value of the IP? How inventive is it? You know, that's something you should know to kind of get a sense of, the core of. This is really unique, and this solves a problem in a very unique way, and the value proposition is high. So, and then of course the IP owner's opportunity cost. The fact that you're licensing an exclusive license with one, you're eliminating your opportunity with all the others. So that's an economic opportunity cost. I'm not going to go through this. This is a little diagram of how, you know, the process of commercialization or licensing. One of the things I wanted to say, John prompted me to say what I said yesterday. I would always tell my tech managers, you know, the individuals responsible for negotiating a license, I want more good deals, not fewer perfect deals, right? So John said, you know, look, get the deal done, make sure it's reasonable, it can stand the test of, you know, scrutiny, and you know, you've done your best for the, you know, reasonably so. Could we keep arguing? Could we keep trying to get a little bit more? Probably, but sign the deal. If it's reasonable, then let's move on to the next deal. So consider all these as moving parts. Scope of the license field. So this first thing I always say to a licensee, what do you need? And they go, well, yeah, I want, so here's the patent scope. You know, they've signed a confidentiality agreement. They know my patent, it's pending, or maybe it's issued, so they know what that is. Okay, where do you have rights? Well, we have rights in the United States, we have India, we have a PCT. Oh, okay, so we've defined that, so it's potentially the world. You want the world? And they'll say, yeah, I want the whole world. I go, well, are you in the whole world? Well, no, I'm only in India. Well, then why would I give you the United States when you're not in the United States? They go, well, we want to move into the United States. Oh, well, okay, that's another story. So that becomes part of the negotiation. Also, field of use. Do you guys do field of use licenses? Yeah, love those, you know, because you can license exclusively in automotive and then license exclusively over in aviation sort of thing. In my world of agriculture, I can license in wheat and then turn around and license it differently in another crop. So I love that because you're giving exclusivity, and I love exclusivity in particular because everything ratchets up in terms of obligations, value, everything is just at a higher level. Everybody's got to be at the top of their game. and you can license a single technology to multiple exclusive licensees. So I like that. So field of use and geography, license fee, as I mentioned, for us typically non-refundable, upfront fee. And, you know, I'm sure you guys have gone through the process of kind of determining through some kind of pre-negotiation valuation of what you think a reasonable license fee is. You know, it's got to be reasonable, but it can't be, I think, should be reasonable. I always think, well, what happens if someday, and have you guys ever been to court? Have you gone to a court and had to show what you've done in terms of licensing and your arguments? Well, it's sobering. I've done it several times. And they look, you know, the judge and both attorneys and the jury looks at your work, and that's when you go,
We have a central audit system which can ask us, how did we arrive at that?
yeah, you got to be ready to defend it. So it's, I just always felt like, I don't want to be in the courtroom and go, well, Your Honor, they would basically give me everything I wanted, so I got as much as I possibly got. No, I always wanted people to think I'm a reasonable person. It's based upon some rationale, okay? And there's a variety of ways to get to that license fee. Royalty on sales, you can do it in different ways. Typically, I always start with a percentage of net sales. And then it starts getting interesting. Do you guys put in milestone payments?
Yeah.
Aren't they great?
Both technical and financial.
Yeah, so I think of, and I'm going to be talking about this, and also minimum annual royalty is a great tool, right? You guys use those. They're so powerful in terms of this design. The milestone payments, that's such a great way to share risk and value capture, because you can say, okay, well, let's see, we've got this technology and it needs, we haven't even done a pilot scale. Tell you what, you go do, I'm not going to charge you all the license fee up front, right? I'm going to only charge you maybe a quarter of it. But when you have a successful pilot, then you're going to pay me another portion of that license. You guys do that? Yeah, because it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Because you've now taken a little of the risk off of them. Yeah, and when they successfully succeed there, you can get a little of the value, right? So that's the point there. So I love milestones. Now, events versus time. I'm kind of split personality. On the one hand, I love event-based because it truly, I think, reflects the reality of, okay, first field trial, first human trial success, first regulatory approval, those kinds of things where those are meaningful risk reduction steps. Versus time, I really like, because it's easy to monitor. And we're going to talk about this, I think, license agreement monitoring. Do you guys do that? Yeah, that's important. Post-signing license monitoring becomes critical, and it's so much easier to monitor. And I love it. As a director, I would go tell my staff, and I'd say, okay, go to all the agreements that are in force, and I want you to look at all of the minimum payments that are due this year, and I know how much money I had coming in, and I could plan, right? I knew, as long as those agreements were going to stay in force, how much money I was going to get in. So it was a handy management tool. The minimum annual royalty, I love it because it's such a great tool to force, I hate to use the word force, but to pressure the licensee to perform. So here's the way I would always do a minimum annual royalty. So remember I said I'll sit down with them and go, okay, let's talk about your commercialization plan. And then I tell them, I said, look, I'm on the team. We're partners here. I want to know how you're going to do it. What are the steps you're going to take? You're going to do this, you're going to do that, and you're going to, what's your date of first sale? What's your projected date of first sale? I go, well, we think we can have a product out in 2 years. Great. And I will have talked to them about how much they're going to have to spend to get it to that point. And I say, yeah, I'll account for that in the negotiation. So And I've also asked them to make some projections about market size and market capture. So we can agree on what projected sales might look like, okay? Therefore, and you know, you guys do this too, you know, they'll sit down with you, go, okay, yeah, and I say, no, be reasonable, don't be too optimistic or pessimistic, let's try to be realistic here. You think that you're going to have your first sale 2 years, okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do, because I've been in product development. Any of you ever been in product development? It almost, it never happens as easily as you hope. There's always problems, and it's always delays, and some technologies more than others. So I go, okay, because I'm a nice guy, I'm going to give you an extra year. So you are telling me that you're going to have your first payment or your first sale 2 years. So what I'm going to say then is the anniversary, third license year, you will pay me a minimum annual royalty at the beginning of the year in a lump sum. And how do we determine that amount? I look at their projections and I go, you're projecting that you're going to sell $100,000 worth, and we've agreed on a 5% royalty. Okay, so you owe me $5,000, right? So what I'll do you have a comment?
So generally this clause, minimum annual royalty payment, becomes part of every agreement which you sign.
Yeah.
Exclusive or non-exclusive, or also depends on the stage of the development of the technology.
Absolutely.
Okay,
Oh yeah, that's part of that's one of the factors that go into, because it's, you know, how long is it going to take them to get it to first sale? The point I'm making here is that I want us to agree on what their launch date of sale is going to be, and then I'm going to be generous in giving them 1 extra year, because this is another little trick of the trade. Show some generosity initially. If you can, it'll pay off in the long run later. Because later, you know, the amounts will be higher, and they'll be like, and I go, look, I already helped you out a lot here. This time, no, you know, you're going to have to. So you can turn the crank a little bit. So what I do then is I say, okay, let's agree on these minimum annual royalties. They pay the minimum at the beginning of the year, and then at the end of the year, they do the calculation. However many they sold, if they sold the same amount as they prepaid, they don't owe me any more money. But if they didn't, they have to eat that amount. So it forces them to go out there, push it. So, and this minimum annual royalty and milestone payments are such a great tool later on. As your license marriage evolves into year 5 and 6 and 7, when it gets, you know, the problems come in and so on, you can use this as leverage. You know, you owe me $100,000 next February. I think we better talk. And you know, like when the inventor comes to me and goes, Dick, I'm telling you, the quality of their product is not good, and my reputation is on the line. I look at the agreement. There's really nothing in there that gives me the right to come in and like terminate the agreement. But I can also say, look, you're going to owe some money here. You better fix the quality of your products. And so anyway, these are some of the tools. Now, sub-licensing rights. I never automatically give sub-licensing rights. Do you guys do that too? No. It's always a negotiable item. Yeah. And I really like sub-licensing rights. So that conversation that I was just referring to, where I sit down and say, okay, we got potential rights around the world. You're in India. You say you want the United States, but you're not in the United States. Okay, well, why would I license you? Well, we're going to be investing a lot of money here to develop the technology. We're going to make it easier to commercialize in the US and other countries. So therefore, we'd like to have the right to go into the US. Okay, well, maybe you get an option. Or maybe I allow you to sublicense. Okay, maybe a sublicense. I like sublicenses. And sublicense always requires my approval as licensor, right? I get a chance, they're obligated to let me see it and approve it. And of course, the sublicensee owes us the royalty. And we can also throw in the negotiation how we might share sublicense fees. So I like it. One of the things I'm always keeping in mind, someone once said, one of our presidents said, Cornell University is the land-grant university for the world. Now, aside from kind of a pompous statement, in some ways it's true. We're around the world, and we don't just think of ourselves as a university in New York or a university in the US. We think our technologies, the world deserves our technologies to spread them around. So I'm always thinking, what can I do for that technology through the license mechanisms to make sure that the licensee is incentivized to help spread it out, and disincentivize them if they try to hold on to it too tightly. And again, I can use that through some of these. I can say, I can adjust minimums going forward. Another point John mentioned, and I think it's an important one, I consider license agreements to be living documents that can and should be modified as situations change. I'm always willing to readjust royalty rates, even minimums maybe, if my licensee can document the rationale, and if I think they're being honest. I mean, have you guys had to deal with enough licensees where you can pinpoint some and you go, they're being honest, and you look at these over here and go, no, you know what they're doing. They're not being honest with you. I'm happy to help the ones that honestly have issues, and I want to be a good partner. To us, we heard through the grapevine that people said, we love working with Cornell. They're fair, they're reasonable, they are good partners. Sometimes the license terms are kind of high, okay, but at least they're fair and reliable. And they don't say that about every university. I want my reputation of Cornell University to be high, and I would recommend all of you want the reputation to spread around industry, like those are the people to work with. Not because they're easy to work, not because their terms are easy, but because they're reasonable people and they're fair. And future IP, do you guys let that future IP flow in? No? So how do you handle it when, so here's your licensed IP, and then the researcher, inventor carries on with the work. What happens to future invention?
Under that project, and in case, so that is like shared sort of thing. In case there is new IP, depending upon who has contributed,
Okay.
then based on that we take a call.
So if the licensee has funded the work?
So funded necessarily doesn't mean that they will be owning it.
No. But if they've funded it, do they have some inherent right to license it? First right of refusal, that's a nice one. Yeah. Here's a little tool I use. Now, for us, ownership always has to do with inventorship. So if we've invented, we own it. But anyway, so in the future, our licensee has this licensed patent, let's say. I think of it as an umbrella. Think of the claims. Those of you who know patents well, think of the patent claims. That's what you've got. If that future invention made by our inventor comes out, even if the company has funded it, and let's say the company has funded the work, that invention comes out, my question is, does it fall under the umbrella or not? Because if it falls under the umbrella, there's not much I can do with it anyway. So I will just say it can automatically flow into the license agreement by being added to the list of licensed patents. Because I can't do anything else with it, right? So why not just give them a little bit more value? They're going to pay for it too, by the way. My exclusive licensees always pay my patent expense.
So generally, if
Joint?
Yeah,
Joint
joint
ownership.
ownership
Okay.
they would like to have.
Yeah, understood.
Even if there are inventors from one side, there will
Yeah.
be joint ownership and the cost of prosecution costs, etc. can be shared.
Okay. Yeah, well, you won't be surprised I don't
Joint
do
ownership,
that, but
each party is free to commercialize it and reap the benefits.
do they pay a royalty?
They'll pay a royalty only if, a third party, anybody finds and wishes to take the license from one of the parties, one of the co-owners. So usually it is that the industry is more interested in being a co-owner because they have funded it, but they would like to commercialize it and keep the benefits with them. They don't want to share it with the academia partner.
So I can share one experience where we had a different kind of situation. So one technology we licensed out to company. So initially so company took the technology, they scaled it up, and they were thinking of bringing some amendments to the updation to the technology. So what they did, so first agreement which they signed, they say, okay, this will remain applicable for this technology, which somehow they will not be taking to the market. So whatever modification will be done by the company as well as with the inventor, they will have a joint IP, and that technology will be commercialized by the company, and the institute will get the royalty.
We get royalty on it, okay.
Royalty and maybe some upfront fees, not at that stage, maybe once they are ready with the modification.
Okay, well, you get some royalty. That's good to know. John, you had a comment?
It has to be joint ownership. You have to be very careful. There are two flavors, the American flavor and the British flavor. The American flavor is we jointly own, we can operate independently without consultation, without paying compensation, and we do it independently. The British approach flows down to most of the countries like Canada and India that were former colonies. And it is, thou shalt jointly own, but it's a requirement that you will consult as to what one party wants to do. You will inform the other. If the other party does something and earns compensation, it needs to be shared in some manner with the other party. And so it's tight. So you need to look to see if you have a national law in your country which is different than the way you think you operate down at your institutional level. That's my comment, is that for some reason joint ownership popped up into national legislation around the world. You just have to be aware of it.
Yeah. As John says, in the U.S., joint owners of a patent both have equal undivided rights, 100%, which is, illogical under the law. But so I'm not an advocate of joint ownership unless there's joint inventorship. But that, you'll do it your way. IP costs, as I said, it's exclusive license. My licensee pays 100%. That's part of how we become sustainable. And then IP enforcement, how do you handle, have you had that situation in an exclusive license? Who's responsible for IP enforcement? Yeah, like if you get a third party, licensee, licensor, and there's some party over there that's infringing, who's responsible for monitoring, enforcing, litigation? Licensee, licensee. Yeah, same here. Right.
But I think there are certain clauses wherein the licensees have asked that you should monitor and we have done that in MCA.
I think our clause is something that both parties will, reasonably, that will certainly alert each other if we find any potential infringement. Now, here's one. Do you allow the transfer of a license to a third party? No. Okay. We used to. We were just silent. And we found a company that turned around and sold. Basically, they sold the license.
Out is different from sub-licensing.
Yeah. So with sub-licensing, they get a license. Transfer the license, they're getting the parent license. And so what we found was, in a particular situation we were in, the company had paid a small amount. They had done some work, to be honest. They had done some development work, but then they turned around and sold the license for many, many multiples of the license fee, and we got nothing. And we just thought, you know, that in all, looking at it was just not right, and you know, and so we should have got a little bit. So we put in a clause that you can't transfer the ownership, or the ownership of the license without our approval. Okay, scope of the license. What are you transferring? So you know, I account for all that when you sit down. I've had that dialogue with the other designer, like, okay, which countries, field of use. I know my IP, I know if I've got biological property, I've got in the back of my mind my value proposition. So I've got some notion of what I think the value of the scope of that, the guaranteed compensation. And there's a lot of different ways to slice that. I've used all kinds of different methods to come up with that upfront license fee. To me, part of it is, it should be a reasonable amount. You know, if it's Tata, $5,000 is not enough, right? If it's a little, you know, little food ma and pa business in Pune, maybe $5,000 is reasonable. I mean, it's all got to fit and it's all got to make sense. Royalty on sales, that I like percentage of royalty on sales, because then it allows the marketplace. It allows, you know, the marketplace is deciding, you know, because then pricing can fluctuate. We have some licenses, I don't know how you guys do it. Do you guys usually use percentage of net sales? Yeah? Good.
There's a post for net profit also. Not always goes with the net sales. It all depends on.
I'll tell you why I never liked profit. Because our friends, anybody here a CPA? Anybody here an accountant? Oh, they are so clever. Because they can figure out ways to make it not profitable. Why taking this expense and that expense? So for us, gross revenue from sales minus, we have a few exemptions, minus shipping, commissions, taxes. But sometimes, like, you know, we do in our plant licenses, sometimes we've done it on a fixed fee basis per unit. Don't like that one as much. And sometimes you get really creative. And I don't mind getting creative with my licensee and saying, well, let's come up with a method of sharing some of that value with us. I mentioned milestone payments, which you use to assure diligence and sharing the risk. Minimum annual, I call it the price of exclusivity. Then, yeah, let's see. I think IP costs, we're covering IP costs. Anybody who's a public sector research institution, I'm always a little surprised when my colleagues at other public sector research institutions don't require the licensee to pay patent expense. Because, I mean, I just have always said, no, that's, you know, you would have to pay for that anyway. So, and it's usually not that much relative to the value of the deal. So every one of my exclusive licenses, licensee pays patent expense. Yeah, okay, so a couple of things. Sort of getting back to this idea of being a designer. So I got into the mode of like really designing, stepping back and looking at how all these things fit together. So this is the first time I've used this. I like to use that, you know, that zoom in and zoom out. You guys ever use that technique, you know, where you are working on a problem, but the problem has components and details, but it also has an overall big picture system. License agreement, perfect example. So in this case, here's the license agreement. We're designers. This is the license agreement. It's got these moving parts, right? So the tech transfer professional is that licensed designer, and the more, you know, I talk to people about it, it's like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We're designing this system. These all combine to produce this nice balance of risk and value capture. And the way, oh, where's my, I had these little where this is royalty rate and this is license fee. Because I think of them as somewhat integrated. And I think I'm going to talk about how much time have we got? 5 minutes, okay. All right, I'm going to speak really fast now because I got only 5 minutes left, so I'm going to have to, not going to be able to cover all the ground I wanted to. Do you guys know about backloading versus front loading? Okay, so that's a basic principle. You know it. Guys upstairs haven't really heard about it very much, but obviously, the more, you know, you want to get that maximum amount up front, then you're probably going to have to give on the back end versus the other. Now, have you had any experience with how it plays out? Taking both of those different choices? Have you ever had that, John, where you've, you know, over time you've looked at, is it in the long run better to try to front load or back load? No? Have you guys?
Depends on the TRL.
On the what?
Depends on the TRL and the
TRL level? Okay.
licensing. If it is at the early stage, I would not front load, I would just back load it.
Okay.
One work out the if it is advanced TRL and my licensee is MNC or a medium sized company,
Yeah.
then I would have a balance sheet. And if I feel like it is a copyright which would get absolute, then I'll front load it.
Yeah. Okay. And, you know, each one is a little bit of a work of art, isn't it? I mean, I know that.
I think it will also depend on how long this technology is going to survive in the market. Maybe
Yeah.
5 years, maybe 10 years, then I would like to have
Front load it? Yeah, okay, and that's a reasonable strategy as well. 20 years of hindsight, you know, looking back and going, okay, what really worked out? I'm of the view that trying to capture the value later in the long run, like I'll take, not even royalty rate, I'll take higher minimum annual royalties and higher milestone payments. And this is a little negotiating, call it again the trick of the trade, and that is you'll sit down here now we're taking off our designer hats and now we're negotiating and we're going, okay, we get down and we're really thinking, you know, a little bit of that adjusting of the upfront license fee, etc. And I have learned that we can argue about royalty rate, for example. Is it going to be 5% or is it going to be 6% or 7%? And there are good arguments, you know, well, our cost of goods sold, you know, and the pricing in the marketplace, you know, okay. Then I'm quietly going, okay, I'll agree with you on that. Okay, we'll make it 6%. Split the difference. And then I'm quietly go, well, what I'm going to do then, I'm going to raise that minimum annual royalty to it. And I've never had anyone complain about that. They go, oh, that's fine. But what that gives you then as the licensor is this really powerful tool. Not only will you make that money later as long as it's enforced, but you get that leverage, like I said. So just the last few things. Use multiple value capture risk share mechanisms. These are all the different. You can even get into some equipment, in-kind things we've done. You know, we try to get really creative. I've never included this in the deal, but it's really part of the deal. They've hired graduate students, you know? And I can't really put that in the deal, but yeah, it's in there somehow. I really like that. Establish your valuation assumptions, justify and be prepared to modify them in a professional dialogue. Okay, you're two designers, right? Trying to arrive at that optimum. And then maybe there's some other alternative benefits. You know, let's make sure that we're, you know, considering all the things that, you know, maybe, oh, you'll donate some equipment to the lab? Okay, well, we can consider that. We mentioned the front-loaded versus back-loaded. No one can accurately predict the true value, so we all know that, right? Yeah, let's get over that misconception. Should be designed so that both parties realize a fair share. And this is the key, I think. If you take it seriously, the risk they're taking, and you express some empathy for that, it's real, and say something to the effect, okay, I've done my pre-negotiation valuation, and you've told me that you're going to have to invest 1.5 million. I've taken that into consideration, and here's my terms. And they go, oh, you've taken that in? Yes, I have. So that's my experience of getting a deal done, if you've acknowledged that in some way. And remember that they understand their industry and business assumptions better than you. I will do this. You know, we start out with me learning about the industry. And I will ask them to, I say, now look, I'm trusting you to tell me, the honest truth about your industry and your company and all that. So tell me and I'll believe it. I might go out and verify it too. So, just to be, because I may come back and go, you told me that X and I'm finding Y. And so most of the time, what I find is that the people I negotiate with, they elevate their standards. Transparency is another thing, and I don't bargain. And I'll leave you with this one, I think, because we're out of time, aren't we?
Almost. You can take one more.
Okay, I'll just finish with a couple of quick anecdotes. The first negotiation, my boss, when I first came to Cornell, IP lawyer, real good negotiator. And he knew patent law, and he knew how to negotiate. And so he says to me, it was a technology I was handling, and he said, okay, you're going to go do the next one on your own. Like, I won't be there, I'm not involved, it's all yours. I went, okay, boss. So I went home. He says, why don't you go figure out what the terms are, what you're going to offer, and let's talk tomorrow before they come in. And so I did my homework. Sorry kids, I can't read the bedtime stories to you tonight. And I came into the office and he goes, okay, so what's the deal? And I said, well, I want $100,000 up front because of these reasons. He goes, oh, good, like that. And I said, and it's going to be a 5% royalty because these reasons. And he goes, okay, good. He says, now what's your negotiating position? And I said, well, I'm going to ask for 150 up front and a 7% because they're going to come back and offer 50 and a 4. And we're going to meet in the middle. And he says to me, I don't think you want to do that. And I said, why not? He says, because that's bargaining. We don't bargain. That's what you, no. He says, that's what you do when you buy rugs. And he says, we don't bargain. This is a professional dialogue. And that's why the designers, you sit down. He said, you told me you wanted $100,000 up front. Don't change your mind unless they give you some good reason to. If they say 50, explain why is it 50? Can you attack my assumptions, my projections? Be ready to defend your 100,000. But also be ready to accept the fact that, no, okay, maybe I have overstated or something. But you're telling the truth, basically. And I mean, that's just the style that I used, and that transparency and honesty always produced high quality results. The other thing I'll say, I'll end with this one. That same negotiation, they brought, have you ever heard of a company called Corning? Corning is our neighbor, Cornell's neighbor, Corning. And so for a lot of reasons, we want to do a good deal with our neighbors, our private sector neighbors, and a successful company. And so I'm doing this negotiation. They wanted this technology. And they bring 3 vice presidents, and I'm in the room by myself. The boss had said, no, you're on your own. I'm like, okay, all right. So they had these 3 vice presidents, and I'm in there, and I had, I'd gotten myself ready, and I think they weren't ready for the honesty. And I just kept saying, it's 100,000, this is my rationale, and et cetera. Over time, what happened was they agreed to terms that were some of them were exceedingly favorable to Cornell, like too favorable. And I thought they were 3 vice presidents who were capable of handling the negotiation. Have you ever been in a negotiation with people who are incapable, who are incompetent? It's unnerving. Like, no, you shouldn't say that to me, because I could take advantage of you. I won't, but I could. I took advantage of these 3 gentlemen. And I walked out, they signed this deal, and I'm like with my boss, I'm like, yeah, look what they signed. Boy, did we get a sweetheart deal. About 3 months or so later, one of them called me and said, hey, wait a minute. We just realized what you did. I go, what do you mean, what did I do? You went in with your eyes open. No, you knew that you were walking us into a situation. I go, and they go, license terminated. So that's the first time I learned you can win the negotiation and lose. I had to start all over again to go find a licensee. So I was like, no, don't take advantage of people. Try to do a good deal, design a good deal. All right. Guess that's it. Yeah. You'll have these slides, and I have some examples of how you guys know this stuff. I mean, this is like, different ways to carve up. If you've got a $250,000 MPV, and you say I want 250 up front, or we're going to adjust that. So lots of room to be creative with your license terms, and this is license contract. You don't need to go through that. And these are some details that you probably all know anyway, so we don't need to go into that. License fee, and we could really dive into deep, in depth in license fee, how to come up with it. And I'll be honest with you, if I have a really important technology, really valuable, it's big and important for whatever reason, I'll spend a lot of time on it and really get ready. But many of the technologies, you don't have time. So you give it a reasonable shot, and you think, hey, $50,000 up front, that's a reasonable, it's called earnest money, and we'll catch the value later with the minimums. Any questions? Yeah.
So, in a license agreement, you have a background IP, and that IP is not means already licensed to someone. Now you have another license deal. So how you take care of that background IP?
So we've got some IP that I've licensed, and I want to license to another party. So when I
background IP, there is
That's a committed IP.
that is a committed IP to someone else, but it is a prerequisite to the transfer of the license agreement.
Well, my license agreement states that if it's exclusive, if I've licensed exclusive, that means that I have not licensed, I haven't provided rights to anyone else. Now there are some variations on the theme where we've put together exclusive consortia, but it's all made very clear. We'll have like a group of exclusive licensees. That's a little different. We didn't do it very often, but we did do it.
I did it actually. The same thing, I found that even it becomes a prerequisite to go into multiple deals. There were 2 instances. I gave exclusive using the field of use, multiple people free. That's one of the scenarios that you can handle. The other way around was consortium. That you make a parent classification of a patent that will go and you will declare it as the non-exclusive. Saying that this particular IP cannot be given as an exclusive mode. Whatever the application of the field which you were talking about can be exclusive, but this will be a consortium which is formed into a non-exclusive, which we can edit. So there were 2 case scenarios.
So,
So go ahead, and then he wants to. Yes.
so regarding that misrepresentation thing, so
Yeah.
suppose the party wants to audit the lab books and all. So what do you think, it should be allowed? Is it okay okay or it has any repercussions?
We are generally an open book institution. We believe in openness. I think if they had a real serious concern, I want to know too. I'd want to. So I think the quick answer is I would be in agreement that they should be able to see notebooks. Yeah.
And second question, maybe you can park. I'm just quoting that based on my understanding of the webinar, 5-day webinar which we had. I realized that you said that 70% of the time in US you don't use TRL levels for tech transfer.
That's general. In the U.S., we're not really. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think we should use TRL more.
We are
But
very particular about the TRL
Yeah.
level, and that TRL level 5 to 7 is a sore point for us.
because you don't hit it very often.
Yes. So how to translate that? That is a sore point.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to ask you, what is the how do you realize that this technology needs to be upgraded via a startup or some spin-off in between, so that there are takers eventually?
Well, we do the work necessary to understand the stage of development. We just don't give it that formal TRL.
Okay.
It's a useful tool. Funny, I didn't discover it until I started coming out to places like India. What's this TRL? Yes, it was invented by NASA. Yeah, I was like, oh, why don't I know about it? And we went back, and now I'm a big believer. My students have to do a TRL assessment of
We
their.
have the manufacturing readiness level as well,
Yeah,
and operating readiness level.
that's good. I think it's a good way to get the licensee and licensor on the same page with the level of risk, stage of development, and what's necessary. Because TRL also gives you the map of what you need to do and invest and spend to get to the next levels. Yeah.
Many times we develop the process for the pharma product,
Yeah.
key source material. And when client is coming, it's a match, product market match. So in that case, what happens? When we are teaching non-exclusive, being a pharma client, they are not keen on taking non-exclusive license. So each client or pharma client asks for the exclusive license. So in such a situation, like what is your take? And we also don't want to lose the client, because we also want to conclude the deal.
Okay, so make sure I understand.
What he wants to say is that he wants to give a non-exclusive license to a pharma company, but company will not be interested because they want a non-exclusive, they want an exclusive license. So in such a situation, what could be his argument as a technology manager to convince the pharma company that they take that technology from us?
Why they
On a
should
non-exclusive basis.
why they should invest in it with and only have non-exclusive rights.
Wait a minute, this is a pharma company?
It's a pharma company.
Oh, there's no discussion. They need an exclusive.
To
And
develop
conversation.
You're talking about to develop a product, a drug, or a diagnostic
Process for API or
PSS.
for a process. Process.
Process for an active pharmaceutical ingredient, developing it
Oh,
from the
for a
taking
bioprocess
from lab,
system.
yes.
Well, that's maybe a little different because they're not selling the product; they're just using your technology to produce the product.
And the-
Yeah, and there's probably lots of room for them to develop their own in-house techniques and just say, look, you can figure out how to produce. You have my basic technology. What is it? Is it organism? Are they?
It's a chemical process.
Oh, chemical process. Not bio. It's not bio. Chemical process.
Chemicals.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say maybe they have the opportunity to optimize the process in their own way to be better at it than other non-exclusive licensees. See what I mean?
As a pharma company, I will not be convinced with that.
Yeah. But if
Want a exclusive
we are facing day in day out such a situation,
process of
Huh?
Process pattern, process related technology should be an exclusive. Yeah, I mean, most of the time companies, they always say we will take the exclusive.
as you say,
license.
they
Well,
take-
I mean,
So limited exclusivity also will not work?
well,
I'm going to take
That's
this
it,
study.
right? Yeah, let's take
Okay.
the discussions offline so
Okay.
we manage
Can
the
we
time.
take it over tea, coffee and ice?
I guess I would just say, you want exclusive? Are you willing to pay for it?
that also they revert back. Means when we pick for higher values,
Yeah.